So Erin is a teacher educator in science and environmental education. She teaches at several post-secondary institutions and is on the board of the Board of Earth Rangers. Nina Alexander is a former classroom teacher in Halton and the new education program manager for Earth Rangers. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please share them in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll try to ensure that they all get answered. So now I'll pass things over to Nina.
Thank you so much, Naomi, and thank you guys for joining us. And as it was mentioned, if you do have any questions that kind of come into your mind as we're presenting, please do throw them up in the chat. We will at the end try and get to them all, or if they kind of marry what we're speaking to, we're happy to make it a conversation. So welcome. And it's a pretty exciting topic that Erin and I are quite eager to share in the way from, kind of personal experiences of what we've seen, whether it be in the classroom or just through, more science and research base. So we're going to start with our, we'll go to the next slide with our overview. Actually, sorry, yeah, you're right, Erin. We should probably give a little shout out. So if you guys can just in the chat post where you're all from, so we can kind of get an idea of where everyone's coming from, whether it be by region or city, so we can get a feel of your location. So I'm, Burlington, awesome. I'm Waterdown, so I taught in the Halton board, and Erin is Toronto based. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So we have Toronto, we have Algoma District School Board. I'm not sure where that is. Hastings.
Up north.
Is it?
Yes, Sault Ste. Marie area, if I'm not mistaken.
Halton.
Tiana.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. Well, looks like we have quite a range of locations. So we'll go. So our goal today is just to reinforce the environmental learning for all, taking care of self and community in response to global climate change by connecting to some resources. We hope that you can have a few takeaways. So we'll go on to our next overview and what it's going to look like for today's presentation. We're going to talk about, what exactly is eco-anxiety, then just some management skills and tools. So what does it look like? How can we instill hope and sustainability? We'll share some resources, and then, as we mentioned at the very end, we're going to do a Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Nina. So just to check in with everyone, and I saw someone already mentioned that they have a sense of eco-anxiety for themselves, but my first question for you is, if you don't mind adding in the chat, how familiar are you with the term eco-anxiety? So are you a lot or very familiar? Are you a little bit familiar, or not at all, like you've never heard the term eco-anxiety before? So if you could just write in the chat for us, how familiar are you with the term eco-anxiety? Just for you personally, this is the first focus for you personally.
So we got two littles, one a lot.
And I saw one a lot earlier up as well. Another little, okay. And it might be you've come today because you've never even heard of this term, and that's fine too. I mean, we're happy to have anyone here for wherever you're feeling. Yeah, and just become more familiar over the last year. I think that's pretty valid. It's definitely been in sort of the public discourse or public media much more over the last year. My next question for you is same question in terms of what you might answer, but how much has it come up for you in your teaching? So how much has the term or the sentiment from your students of eco-anxiety come up?
More every year. Absolutely, I would agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's the way that it's been coined, that we're calling it eco-anxiety, for obviously, I think as educators, we've known it's been there, but now that it's actually this defined term, I think was new for me, at least, hearing that actual term.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And so it did only just come, say in the last, around 2011, actually, Albrecht was the first person who formally named this term eco-anxiety, but that was in a much more sort of research or academic space. And that's how it takes a while sometimes for these things if it's coming out of academia. Another term for it could also be climate grief. So you may have heard of that or seen that as well. And Albrecht talked about this notion of worry, nervousness, depression, and concern that is specifically linked to or triggered by our awareness of ecological degradation due to climate change. And another sort of subset of it is another term he came up with called solastalgia, which is where, similar to the term nostalgia, where we're missing our home, like a homesickness. Solastalgia is a missing or awareness of disconnection from a reality we used to know related to our climate. So, thinking about changing seasons, thinking about the flooding that we see happening in BC, which was predated by the fires. So some really extreme things, and how we feel in response to these big changes that we see. Some other examples, obviously, Arctic sea ice melting and the images that go along with that, both of the open waters, and also the polar bear has taken on a role as the, I guess, the totem animal to represent the Arctic sea ice challenge up there. I just recently this week read an article about albatross. Divorce rates are going up. So albatrosses mate for life, and they have a very low divorce rate. I think in normal times or previous times it was like less than 1%, but now scientists are seeing upwards of 8% divorce rates, which they've attributed to climate change, where mating pairs are seeing that climate stresses and they're kind of blaming it on their mating partner, and they're, even though they've had very strong nesting and strong reproductive quality, they're splitting up because climate is changing too much for them to manage with that stress. And then we're also seeing eco-anxiety represented by our students. So some of you are acknowledging that too. So this is an article in Toronto Star last year, so February 2020, which was representing some students, which in the Toronto area, not far from where I am, who were talking about this is a real thing for them, this level of anxiety that is directly connected to global climate change and their impacts around the world. So it is acknowledged now by the American Psychological Association and the DSM, which is the official sort of documentation of mental health. They're calling this is a real thing. So for us as educators, it's something that I think we have an imperative to be aware of, and that to think about how we can help support our students and even support ourselves, have a critical awareness of these emotions and bringing this emotionality and emotional response into our teaching, that it's not just enough to teach about content anymore. And not to say that we all were anyway at this stage, but to really acknowledge the holistic aspect of learning that's coming into our classrooms. And we need to also provide opportunities to disrupt the anxious patterns, like it becomes a mind pattern that can spin and spin, and how we can use education and science education in particular to help disrupt that dysregulation towards more positive transformation, not just for our students, for ourselves, but also for the environment. And Ohala is a researcher who talks a lot about this. We have a list of resources at the end if you're interested in the sort of academic and research background, but definitely we have lots of resources to share to help you do this in your classroom. So what does this all mean? So what we'd like to do is two things. So we're going to focus on how we take care of ourselves. So self-care in the face of eco-anxiety, and also how do we then support our students through science ed to combat their and transform out of eco-anxiety.
Yeah, that was
So the first. Oh, go ahead.
That was really well explained, Erin. And I'm just looking at the chat as well, and someone just in response to the level of eco-anxiety currently in place. I think not only is it been a little bit more transparent and evident, but just Carl actually mentioned that the fact that during the pandemic as well, right, where we're just kind of connecting more of that mental health and just a heavier weight with that in response to the pandemic too. Anyways.
Absolutely, yes, thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so, right, so let's take care of ourselves first, because, put your own oxygen mask on first, teachers. So this may be very familiar to some of you, and this may be completely unfamiliar. So we'll all do it together. It's a 1-minute activity in mindfulness. And what the idea of this is to help regulate our bodies in that holistic sense of bringing ourselves into our body, into our breath, and kind of disrupting those anxious patterns that happen in our mind through this mindfulness. So I have a mindfulness app called Insight Timer. I have no, I don't get kickbacks, but it's just something that I happen to use. I'm going to run a timer for 1 minute. And normally I would do this for longer with my students or for myself, but just in the name of time, we're just practicing. So you have your hand held up, and I know it's a bit funny with my background, but your hand is held up. And the first thing you'll do is focus on the shape of your hand. You'll use your other hand you're going to take it up and take it down, and you're tracing the shape of your hand. So a lot of things are happening there. First of all, the up is the inhale. So you're going at the pace of your breath. So you have to be aware of your breath. So up for inhale, exhale for down, and up. So inhale and exhale. So that's what we're going to do. And if you hit the end of your hand, you just keep going back. So you're focusing on your breath, you're focusing on the feeling of your hand, and that is your goal. If you feel your mind wandering, give yourself some compassion and just focus back in again. So we're going to just try this for 1 minute. It might feel like a long minute, but let's just do this together. Okay, well done, everyone. So again, a mindfulness practice that calms us down. And we can even talk about the science of mindfulness practice. We can connect this into our science curriculum in how our nervous system is responding and how our breath regulates other aspects of our bodies and so on. I'm sure many of you can make other connections. But we can, you can see a link there, thecalmcorner.com, and they have all kinds of mindfulness practices there that you can bring into your classroom. That's a great way to start the day or in transitions for your day, something we recommend. So thank you for participating in that.
Thanks, Erin. And even better, that's a great activity to take your students outside and just find a quiet space. And I found that was a great addition to our day. It just takes, a couple of minutes, and whether, I know there's obviously challenges with limitations of supervision and maybe space wherever you are. But I would just, if I didn't have the correct supervision, I would just walk around our building on school property, and we just find a quiet space. And another great tool that I think we mentioned later on is the Calm app as well. That's free, and they even have meditation, guided meditation for kids, for students, and even Matthew McConaughey. There's some really great voices on there actually. So yeah, so I think we're now on to kind of some more management, more of a framework that presents how to handle eco-anxiety. And this is based on some research from Earth Rangers. And again, they pulled in some experts, some scientists, and then it's just, it's pretty amazing how emotionally driven this framework has become. So not only are we focused on education, but it's really, really highly focused on just the social emotional capacity, and building that and working that into your daily practice. And I think a great connection that Erin and I, she's very well versed in all the curriculum docs, and it's just pretty amazing that you know, even you look at new curriculum documentation like the math, the numeracy, and they actually have embedded now the social emotional component. So, you know, here's crossing fingers that the new revision of science, they will do the same, because it's absolutely needed that as you're teaching or instructing science-based material, we need to have that connection with the social, the well-being of children. And so the number one step is just empathy, you know, really understanding and listening to your students and hearing them out on where they're sitting and where they're feeling. And especially within the last few years, you know, there's been all these pretty impactful images. And I find that was what kind of hit my students the greatest, was the images. So that, you know, they see animals with plastic straws up their nose, the little turtles, or that image, you know, as Erin was mentioning, the polar bear kind of trapped on this floating iceberg. So those images can be quite impactful to our students. And I feel that that's exactly what resonates with them and what they feel, and kind of drives their environmental anxiety and their worry of what's next, what's happening to our world. So really trying to hone in on that empathy and connecting with your students is really important. And then the second component is the education piece. So obviously we're offering information. We are still, you know, whether you're using your resources from curriculum kind of based information, but, you know, you're educating them and providing them with, so they feel a little bit more informed. And then the third would be environmental stewardship. So somehow I feel that kind of connects well with the empowerment piece. So you're just finding moments that they can feel a little braver and a little stronger in what they're doing, and that they're kind of just one step forward. And there's lots of examples that you can, you know, connect with. One of the recent things I did just before I left the classroom, we did some butterfly rearing. So, you know, it's pretty easy to do all that within your classroom. And students, I can't tell you how much this is grade 7, and they loved every morning coming in and just seeing the general growth and the movement of, you know, their stages of butterfly. So it was pretty cool, just, you know, and free. So these are free things that free resources you can tap into, or, you know, seeds you can grow in your class or things like that, just to kind of give them this sense of, you know, connecting with our world and the environment, which was, again, then just enhances the excitement, right? So you can see this framework is really well connected. And this is also available on the Earth Rangers website as well, where there's actually a teacher section, and kind of my new role is to enhance that. So to be a supporter of educators, specifically in the environment. So yeah, that's it.
That's great. So you can see this as it's one framework of a way of acknowledging the eco-anxiety aspect, and that's coming into our classrooms, and how we need to address it and need to embrace it in a sense of the reality, the lived reality of our students. Beyond that, there are lots of reasons why we need to attend to environmental issues in our Ontario curriculum. If you weren't already familiar with this, we have the scope and sequence documents, which come out with every so often for each different curriculum. So for example, there's one for Indigenous education. This is the environmental education scope and sequence, where they've gone through at least the current curriculum and found, and across the curriculum areas, but particularly with science as well, and look for ways that we need to be attending to environmental responses, environmental education in our science classroom, which is based on the 2009 policy document from Acting Today, Shaping Tomorrow. But as Nina said, and as many of us in the room know, that a new curriculum should be coming out soon for science. 2007 is the last version of the K-8. And we're really hoping that this notion of environmental and eco-anxiety is coming through more deeply in it. But just to say that this is already the kind of work we should be doing in our science classrooms, and bringing in environmental ed. One thing that we might now say needs more attention is a lot of the language from the current documents talks about having students plan and propose action. So, learning about the content, doing some research in their community, or perhaps some research on a more global scale, and then proposing an action plan, which is okay. But if you look back to the framework that Nina just shared with us about eco-anxiety, proposing action isn't necessarily enough. That empowerment component, the part where we shift from feeling anxious about the future to involving ourselves, community, our classrooms, in making positive change in our local community, is a real piece around building up self-confidence, self-efficacy, and transforming from the anxious mind to the more empowered mind and body as well.
Yeah,
so we have a few tools here to share with you.
And I just threw up in the chat too, just the link to the clubs. So Earth Rangers really takes pride in, they have, really great connections with animals and their presentations. They do offer virtual animal presentations, and I'm not sure if anyone's ever seen their in-person presentations, but I know my students always loved the connection with animals and just making them feel a little bit more purposeful, and it just really connects well. So to find, a drive and a purpose for them is pretty important. So Earth Rangers also offers a clubs program. So if you're, looking, I know obviously pandemic, it's pretty tough. And that's why we're kind of at this point where we're pivoting to provide other resources for educators, but their clubs program is really great to be run even within just your own classroom. And all the tools there are needed. And then even further, you can complete different missions and earn badges for some of the environmental activities that you do as a class. So the program is really well set up. But yeah, as I mentioned, there's other options there. So have a look, and the clubs program website is just in the chat there. And then we also mentioned, some options for meditation. They're free, that again, you can kind of just download on your phone and take out wherever you need it. Because I find often, you just, it's easier if it's run for you and you can kind of participate or have a look around, encourage those to kind of, focus and take part. And
Right.
then else, sorry, go ahead, Erin.
Well, sorry, I was just going to mention about citizen science as another way of engaging in project-based or issues-based learning in our science curriculum, where citizen science offers students the opportunity to gather data. So it can be very curriculum linked to what we're thinking about in our, whatever our units are. And we can look for, like, you can Google citizen science and find a project in your community. For example, tracking monarch butterflies, or tracking precipitation, or tracking bumblebee, or other kind of pollinators. And you have your students gathering data and contributing to a database of information that scientists can then use to create information and potentially create policy or influence policy. So that's another way of giving our students the opportunity to take action, feel empowered, observe and connect to their local realities, and again, contributing to a much bigger project in many cases.
Yeah, and I also found BASF was actually amazing support. It's the kind of the true inquiry that your students, desire, and they, again, kind of, you don't necessarily have to put it at the level of a competition, but their website provides a lot of great tools, and anything, it can be from chemistry based to more engineer focused, and yeah, it's just a great option if you haven't explored it yet. Obviously back in the day, we would do it as a whole school as well, in the formal kind of science fair way, but it's absolutely the last 2 years I've done it more of just a class-based, or even volunteer with the intermediate students. They were able to choose, and if they wanted to participate, then they were allowed to do that. But it's another really great resource to get your students involved. And you could even direct it in the way that, maybe you set your own parameters and it has to be environmental focused. So there's a lot of great options that you can kind of take from that.
So, the first thing that we wanted to make aware is that eco-anxiety is real, that if you didn't know that you had a name for it, now maybe you can apply that idea that our awareness, our students' awareness of the realities of our world, our changing world, the timelines that we have are things that are impacting our capacity to teach, to help our students have positive educational outcomes. That it's a type of anxiety among many other types of anxiety that our students are living with, and for us as educators to be attentive to that. And then by extension, how we can use science, in particular science education, to address it, to really enhance the well-being of our students by creating opportunities for taking action. So what is happening in our community that we can decide to take action on? What does action mean for us as educators? There's a broad spectrum of ways of taking action, from planning school-based projects to all the way up to what you see in the picture there, which is more of that notion of activists, like a traditional vision of an activist, where you have people out in protests and marches and posters and all that kind of thing. But action doesn't have to be that, let's say, overtly politicized. We can have our students taking action, like I was talking about with citizen science, that we have action where we're just involving in something that is actually connected to our communities, which leads to the next point, that we look at yes, we're aware of global issues, and yes, we're aware of the complexity, or we can be mindful of the complexity of global climate change. But if we look to our own community for our students, and we think about what is age appropriate for them to get involved, then we're actually being attentive to that notion of eco-anxiety, whether we're being responsive to it or actually mitigating it, stopping it before it's happening, especially with younger learners, and thinking about ways that they can look at their community. Like if it means going out and counting butterflies and inputting that into a provincial or international database, fantastic. They're participating, like I said, in a much bigger project, which helps them feel involved and empowered. The student-led component, so coming out of the inquiry model of science, like what are the wonders and the issues and concerns that our students have? And so what that means for us as educators, it might mean shifting our position in the classroom, not well physically, but also like theoretically, from that kind of notion of the sage on the stage, or the teacher as leader, to more a facilitator. So what are the issues of concern for our students? How do we let them lead the way with their questions, and how do we support them with the resources, the research access, bringing in community leaders to help them enhance their own learning? And that, by acknowledging their desires, their wonders, and their concerns, that we actually are helping to mitigate their eco-anxiety as well. Because again, we're coming back to that notion of empowering them, honoring their voices, honoring their concerns. So that will also help them feel stronger and more resilient inside. And then for us as educators, as teachers, we do have that impetus and mandate to be linked to curriculum. It is there with that scope and sequence document, with the Acting Today, Shaping Tomorrow document. It's already there in principle. And you look at all of these things I've mentioned, such as, inquiry based. So maybe the curriculum in terms of the content isn't what our current curriculum document says, but in terms of skills and the STSE connections. So making sure we're helping our students become aware of our relationships to environment and the impacts we can have, positive and have had negatively, on our environment, that those curriculum links will absolutely be there. So this idea of holistic education, where it's not enough to set aside our personalities, set aside our emotions when we walk in the door, that doesn't work anymore. There's just too much. Our kids are coming in, our students are coming in the door with too much. So we have to acknowledge all of this stuff. And maybe, starting your science lesson with a mindfulness activity was never something that you conceived of before. It was never something you participated in before. I'll tell you, thinking back to my time as a learner, my time as a science teacher wasn't on my agenda. But the research is telling us, and our experiences with youth are telling us, that we have to take time to acknowledge these realities, to acknowledge the feelings that we're having, because otherwise it's just stopping the learning from happening. We have to attend to the well-being of the whole learner, that we think about the social, the emotional, physical, and the environmental impact, right? Because the idea of this, of taking action, is also not just about our learners and ourselves. It's about doing well for the environment, doing well for our more than human neighbors, like for the trees, for the pollinators, for the air around us. For all of this work goes towards not just ourselves as humans, but ideally making the world a better place as well. So we've left a lot of time at the end because we wanted to have lots of time for discussion. We can use the chat. I think probably we're not able to hear your voices, unfortunately, which is just a downside of this format, but we would love to have you write some questions and have more of an open discussion about this, as opposed to it just being, again, shifting ourselves from experts to more facilitators. And we'd like to hear perhaps what are some of the challenges that you may imagine or having already encountered thinking about doing this kind of work with your students. So we open it up to you.
And Erin, I think you summarized that well. I think, again, the wait is just going to kind of continue as we progress with, the world and it being a little bit more, transparent and informative. And, again, you think back to when we were learners and, we didn't ever talk about the waste that we've created, or the fact that, that same plastic fork that you're using is going to be around beyond your years. I don't think those realizations were ever a reality when we were growing up. So to have all of that information, it can be a little bit overwhelming for our students to kind of process those thoughts and those images, because we're just so much more informed and visually disrupted, I think. So that is a reality of our world. And now as educators, we have to be the ones to navigate that. So we have a question in the chat here. It just says, what would you suggest to be the best resource to go to find out about the citizen science project? Love that idea. Do you have maybe a website I can throw up there, Erin, in the chat maybe? And you said it could be community based, right? Like it's regional, or?
Yes. Hang on a second. I'm managing two computers here.
No worries.
Maybe we can have a few different questions come in.
Yep. Yeah, if there's any other questions, if you want to throw them up, that's a great question. Thanks, Jane. Is there any others concerns or questions? Or if you're looking to enhance, maybe your lessons or science-based learning, maybe even environmental-based learning, let us know if you have any questions or needs that you're looking to fill. There's another comment up here. So students in our green committee have an idea about setting up a clock in the front foyer with a time counting down to an average 1.5 degrees Celsius temp rise. However, the admin are concerned about eco-anxiety of students. Yeah, that's a great point to have that. I mean, even just a sensation of, right, a clock, a countdown, this idea of time's ticking. Yeah, that might cause some anxiety. What do we feel? Would you suggest that be an ideal option? What do you think, Erin? Your thoughts on the time down?
Yeah, I think, the students are aware of it already. I think to pretend that it's not happening isn't doing good justice to our role as educators. So, yeah, they're concerned about eco-anxiety. So just like we vaguely modeled in this presentation, we talked about eco-anxiety and then said, so now what? So if you have a clock like that or some other kind of representation of this countdown and the things that are happening, I think then as educators, we have a mandate to be responsive to that. Okay, so we know the clock is counting. So what are we going to do about it? What is our school community? What is our eco club? What is our teacher community? What are we doing to be responsive to this countdown? So Tanya, I don't know, like think about what's happening in your community and what could the students then be doing to counteract that. So for example, not knowing your community, but I might imagine like an average school is maybe using plastic. So you could have students also have a clock or a measuring graph that's also counteracting, saying how much less waste did we produce this week, or how much less water did our school use this week, or thinking about things that can also be graphed and visually representing what did we do in response to this clock that's ticking.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I mean, there's some really great options on Earth Rangers. Even you could do like a battery blitz. So you're collecting, battery waste. But yeah, I think hiding the fact, the reality, I am all for transparency and informing really what truly is going on. So there's no need to hide it. I would agree. But like Erin said, just follow up with a, yes, but this is what we're doing this is how we're doing our part. So we know the reality, but what are we doing to contribute to stop the rise? So at least they know it's there, the fact is there, that the temperature, that there is a rise, but let's showcase what we are doing our part to make a difference.
That's right.
Offer this is, and I'm just reading through the comments too. I mean, there's some other drives you could do, or then putting up posters maybe about idling, especially like this time of year. I think as long as you're showcasing the facts, but then you're kind of providing something to showcase what you're doing about the facts.
And celebrate, celebrating those projects, celebrating the outcomes on one hand. And also, I think another good aspect of learning and doing project-based learning is that we're not always going to be successful. Thinking through, like, say, writing letters to our MPs or MPPs around issues in our communities. And we don't get instant gratification from political machinery, unlike using, Snapchat, for example. So it's also learning around, participation in society, participation in the world, and that things also take time, take investment, that there may be some failure and it's okay to fail, and building up that resiliency as well, which again, I never thought about in the past in relation to science, but it's actually very valuable learning. Like it's again, a holistic approach to seeing the learner as having all of these identities, all of these feelings coming into our classrooms.
Yeah, I would agree.
I'm just curious if anyone in the room can share any experiences of doing this kind of work with your students in the past, whether citizen science or project-based or community-based environmental learning, not necessarily as an eco-anxiety response, but just based on something that you or your students were doing. Has anyone done this kind of work in the past?
That might be a good addition of some other resources, right? Resources and tools that people have used.
Mm-hmm.
Eco schools is another option as well. There, you don't necessarily always have to do the certification piece, because I find it can be quite overwhelming. But they're also another really great support as well.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Can you guys talk a little bit more about that science competition that was on the other page?
Yeah, the BASF. So that's like your traditional back, I think when we were in school, the science fairs. So they traditionally would hold like official science fairs. And they will actually provide, even if you need judges or you need, depending on what level, it can be just as simple as, 7 students maybe decide to do, or 7 groups. But I did it 2 years ago when it was virtual. So we started in class and then it ended up being virtual. And I just found my students, they loved it. They connected so well because they were in charge of their learning and they were in charge of, going where it took them. And it really showcased their personality and their interest. And they, in the end, no matter what, they discovered, they researched, they inquired, they found results. I think it's projects like that, it's moments like that where students really connect and will remember those moments when they were kind of leading the way of their learning. It was really, really great. And I think if I were to do it again, I think I would really focus on, creating, because I found the biggest issue with the students was they didn't know where to start when it's so open-ended, and you're just telling them, well, what do you want to, what question would you like to answer when it comes to, science and technology? It was really hard for them to find a focus and a direction. So I think moving forward, if I were to do it again, it would be focused, give them a subject or a challenge or a problem or an issue, and then they can really focus in on environmental issues that are current. And it is very, very, very well laid out there. I can look up their website too and put it in the chat. But they're really supportive. And they provided prizes too. So they had a virtual award ceremony after all the students submitted, and there was some gift cards and some really great prizes for the students. So they were pretty excited. And I think a great tradition as well, if it could be possible to continue on through, various grades, is that even after seeing all the amazing creations and research that students provided, I think it then gave them, after seeing what other students came up with, it was just great to see them identify with other students and know, like, okay, next year, this is what I want to do, or next year I'm going to, create a bigger, better prototype or whatever it might be. But it was pretty great to just feature other students that had been curious and what they came up with. So it was great. Just reading another comment in the chat. Our students planted trees through RBC initiative. We would like to plant trees again, but having trouble finding info to do this again. Any suggestions for sponsored? Yes, the TD Friends of the Environment are amazing. Even the city. So if you look within your city, whatever your region is, they do free tree planting. That's also an option. I know in the past I've looked for put it out there to my parents, and a lot of companies, if you have parents that are landscapers or just willing to support financially, they will give you the $500 to plant a tree, or depending on how mature you're looking at. But Oakville, even most regions, like even in Oakville, they have Oakville Green, Burlington, I think they changed their name, Burlington Green. But most regions have like an environmental community-based volunteer organization that will support initiatives like that. The Green Apple Grant was another one through Metro. Yes, conservation as well. They love to do sponsoring, especially with students, to get them outside. But then I found the one challenge with the tree planting that you have to kind of keep in mind, depending on where you're getting the trees from. So obviously if they're city planted, they're a little bit more maintained, but is the watering. So you have to really think about when you're planting, and then coming up with some kind of, not to discourage you, but for anyone that's done planting, is just making sure that that tree survives is probably the biggest challenge. Finding one and getting one planted, I think, is easy, but it's the follow-up and making sure that that tree really does survive. But then again, taking your class and your students or whatever it may be, getting other divisions involved where they feel attached or feel a part of this planting. So they're a little bit more compelled to take care of it. And for the BASIF, it's just basif.ca. I can put that up in the chat too. And it looks like they are going forward with a virtual program. So they're doing a competition this year, a virtual fair. So there's the website for BASIF.
I just want to read out this comment from Carl. My students are learning to grow organically using the no-dig and square foot methods with a focus on permaculture, biodiversity, and food sustainability. They are also using their produce to prepare healthy meals. I love it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so much cross-curricular, absolutely, and so much empowerment and taking care of self and community. Thanks for sharing that, Carl. So I'm sure for you as the teacher, Carl, that was a lot of prep up front, but maybe getting funding and so on. And if you want to add on to what kind of work that meant for you, but I'm sure the students would feel so grateful to have opportunities to do that, to be outside, to work with their hands, to apply their learning into the real world. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And it's moments like that your students will never forget, right?
Yeah.
They don't always care about our fancy lessons. They care about the hands-on experience, right? The connections that they're making.
That's right.
Especially when it comes to the outdoors.
Yes. And food.
And food. Yes. So true.
Yeah. Okay. And you receive funding through your board.
That's great.
Yeah. All right. Serge is asking, has anyone tried to grow milkweed? Yes, I have been involved in a milkweed growing project, and it was a little bit of work up front. Well, not really, but just sort of some prep around getting those seeds. I think they have to be, what's it called? Gardeners in the room can help me, but like cold shocked or something. Like you have to plant them and then you put them in the fridge for
Really?
3 weeks. Yeah. And then because they have to be tuned into the season changing. So you grow them from seed to seedling. And when the seedlings are a little bit hardier, like around 2 weeks old, then you can plant them into the outdoors and off you go. Yeah, you plant them inside and then, okay, I'm not an authority on this. And I know the David Suzuki Foundation has done a lot on milkweed gardens and pollinator gardens. So I would check out the David Suzuki Foundation's website for more information on that. But yeah, milkweed is a little bit more finicky than we'd like it to be. So it has like a startup, but once it's going, it's great. And then once you have a patch growing, it tends to be hardier at reproducing on its own. But just to get it started in a patch at your school or in your neighborhood, you have to do a little bit of work up front.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to pop up some of our resources, just a short list, and this is a little bit of a focus more on the research on eco-anxiety and also actions that can be responsive to eco-anxiety. I think, well, I don't know, will our slides be shared? Naomi, do we know how this will be shared other than just having the video available?
I'm not sure, but I can check with Michael and I'll type it into the chat.
Okay, sure. And also, so you don't have to, madly scribble any of this down. You can also contact Nina or myself directly, and we would be happy to work with you. Obviously, Nina in her capacity with Earth Rangers as staff there. I in my capacity as a teacher educator, an environmental educator, and just a passionate person about all of this stuff. I'm happy to help out and support anyone doing this kind of work. So, do jot down our email addresses and we can send you the slides as well separately if you wish. And that's really kind of the bulk of what we wanted to share and get you thinking about this idea of eco-anxiety and then our role as educators, how we can help combat it and support our students in this new world that we live in.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I'm actually going to throw up in the chat too. So again, as mentioned, so it's a new role that I'm working with Earth Rangers, and it's geared towards supporting educators in environmental education, outdoor education. So again, I'm looking for feedback from other fellow educators. So we just started launching our new newsletter that comes out with outdoor ideas for outdoor activities or environmental resources. So I just put up in the chat if you want to join. If you'd like to join the newsletter blasts, I would absolutely gratefully appreciate your feedback and providing any other direction on what you're needing or looking for when it comes to kind of your in-class teachings or out-class teaching.
Right. And all of your resources are free, right, Nina?
Yes, they are all free.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Awesome.
I love getting the Earth Rangers newsletters because in my various courses that I teach, and I look at, there's always one little activity I think, oh yeah, I didn't think to do that. Like, it's just great to have as much input as possible, because doing this on your own can be very isolating and can be very overwhelming, but being in community, being in part of a network of other like-minded educators is just very fulfilling and rewarding. So thank you all. And I hope you're getting a chance to do some good learning and also give yourselves a body break, shake all this stuff off, and self-care, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Erin and Nina. And I know I'll be taking some of this back for activities with my toddler anyways, because I'm not an educator, but something to think about. We'd like to thank our platform sponsor, Explore Learning, for supporting the Zoom platform for this session. If you have any other questions, like I'm sure you can email Nina or Erin. Please don't forget to fill out the survey before exiting this session. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Naomi.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. We're still here if you have any questions. Nina, I did see one